Jinho walked through the long metal hallway of the galaxy. Council Station, his black boots made soft sounds on the shiny floor with each step. The walls were covered with pictures of all the different alien species that belonged to the Council. There were the tall blue Altarians with their big heads and the scary-looking, Vorthak with their sharp teeth and scaly skin, the insect-like hive. Queens stared down from their portraits with their many eyes glowing. The human ambassador had been doing this job for 30 years. He had seen it all, the endless meetings where aliens talked down to humans like they were children. The way they would laugh when humans tried to speak in council sessions. The looks of disgust when humans ate their food or talked about their customs. Jinho was tired of it all, but today was different. Today he carried a special letter in his jacket pocket. Captain Hai-Jin walked beside him. She was younger than Jinho, but she had the same tired look in her eyes that all human diplomats got after working with aliens for too long. Her tablet kept beeping with new messages from Earth. Each message made her face look more angry. The council chamber was huge. It was made of some kind of crystal that the Altarians had grown using their advanced technology. The ceiling was so high that Jinho could barely see the top. Hundreds of seats were arranged in circles around a central platform where the speakers would stand. The seats were made for different body types. Some were for the floating energy beings called luminari, others were for the water-breathing aquatic collective members who needed special tanks. Jinho found his seat in the human section. It was in the back corner, far from the important seats where the powerful alien species sat. The message was clear: humans were not important enough to sit with the real decision-makers. The Altarian Chancellor Zethvar sat in the biggest seat at the front. His blue skin was almost glowing under the chamber lights. The meeting started like all the others. Chancellor Zethvar stood up and began speaking in his deep voice that echoed through the chamber. He talked about order and peace and cooperation, but Jinho knew it was all lies. The aliens only cared about keeping humans under control. They were afraid of what humans might do if they got too much freedom. The first item on the agenda made Jinho clench his fists: new restrictions on human expansion. The aliens wanted to limit humans to only 3 new star systems over the next 50 years, 3 systems for a species that had over 200 billion people living in crowded colonies. The Vorthak representative clicked his teeth together in what passed for laughter when he explained how this would help maintain galactic stability. The second item was even worse: new safety protocols for human trade ships. The aliens claimed that human ships were too dangerous and needed constant monitoring by alien inspectors. Every human cargo ship would have to carry alien observers who would report back to the council. Jinho knew this was just an excuse to spy on human activities and steal their technology, but the third item was the one that broke the camel's back. The aliens demanded that humans hand over their quantum drive technology. They said it was too dangerous for humans to have such advanced technology without proper supervision. The luminari representative flickered between different colors as he explained how this would benefit everyone in the galaxy. Jinho felt something snap inside his chest. 30 years of insults and condescension had finally reached their limit. He thought about all the times humans had saved alien worlds from disasters: the void plague that had killed billions of beings across the galaxy until human doctors found a cure; the spiral wars that had torn apart entire star systems until human negotiators brought peace; the countless mining accidents and natural disasters where human rescue teams had risked their lives to save alien civilians. Captain Hai-Jin leaned over and whispered to him. Her voice was shaking with anger. The latest reports from Earth showed that the Council was planning even more restrictions. Human colonies were being forced to accept alien governors. Human schools were being required to teach alien history instead of human history. Human families were being split up because of new immigration rules that favored aliens. Jinho looked around the chamber at all the alien faces staring down at him. Some looked bored. Others looked annoyed that humans were taking up their valuable time. None of them looked like they cared about human suffering or human rights. They saw humans as useful tools, nothing more. The Hive Queen representative made a series of clicking sounds that the translation system turned into words about human aggression and the need for stronger controls. She talked about how humans were too emotional and too quick to fight, even though it was the aliens who had started most of the recent conflicts while humans tried to make peace. The Aquatic Collective member bubbled something in his water tank about human expansion being a threat to established civilizations, this from a species that had expanded across dozens of star systems by force, while humans had always asked for permission before settling new worlds. Jinho stood up slowly. The chamber fell silent as hundreds of alien eyes turned to look at him. He had requested speaking time, but he knew they would try to limit what he could say. They always did that to human speakers, Chancellor. Zethvar looked annoyed that a human dared to interrupt the proceedings. He waved one of his long blue fingers in a dismissive gesture and told Jinho to make his statement brief. The other aliens made various sounds of agreement. They clearly did not want to hear what the human had to say. Jinho reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the letter. He had written it himself in his small apartment the night before, after receiving the final instructions from Earth President Kyung-soo had been very clear about what needed to be done. The United Earth Federation was done playing games with aliens who would never respect them. The letter was short, but it would change everything. Jinho began to read it in a clear voice that carried across the entire chamber. He spoke about dignity and respect, and the right of all intelligent species to be treated as equals. He spoke about the contributions that humans had made to galactic civilization, and how those contributions had been ignored or taken for granted. Then he got to the important part. The United Earth Federation was withdrawing from the Galaxy Council effective immediately. All human ambassadors would be recalled. All human aid to alien worlds would stop. All human participation in galactic institutions would end immediately. The silence in the chamber was complete. Jinho could hear his own heartbeat as he finished reading the letter. He looked up at the shocked faces of the alien representatives, who clearly had not expected this. Many of them had their mouths open in surprise. The luminari were flickering wildly between colors. The hive queens were clicking frantically to each other. Jinho dropped the letter on the floor and turned to leave. Captain Haijin followed him along with the rest of the human delegation. Their footsteps echoed through the chamber. As they walked toward the exit behind them, the aliens were starting to shout and argue, but Jinho did not look back. As they reached the door, Jinho felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in 30 years, he felt proud to be human. The aliens were about to learn what the galaxy looked like. Without human help, they would discover that humans were not just useful servants, but essential partners, and maybe when their world started falling apart, they would finally understand what respect really meant. Dayun stood in the control room of the massive mining facility on Kepler 442b, looking at the dozens of screens showing mineral extraction operations across the planet. Her team of human engineers had built this place from nothing, turning a dead rock into one of the most productive mining worlds in the galaxy. The local Zenthari population had grown rich from the jobs and technology that humans brought to their world. The communication device on her desk started beeping with incoming messages. Dayun pressed the button, and the face of a panicked Zenthari supervisor appeared on the screen. His green skin was turning pale, and his 4 eyes were wide with fear. He was speaking so fast that the translation system could barely keep up. The news of humanity's withdrawal from the Galaxy Council had reached every corner of the galaxy within hours. The Zenthari supervisor was begging Dayun not to leave. He explained that without human expertise, the mining operations would collapse within weeks. The complex machinery required constant maintenance that only human engineers understood. The safety systems that prevented cave-ins and toxic gas leaks were designed by humans and operated by humans. Dayun listened to his pleas with a cold expression on her face. She remembered how the Zenthari had treated her when she first arrived on their world. They had called her a primitive monkey and laughed at her suggestions for improving their mining techniques. They had demanded that she follow their outdated safety protocols, even though those protocols had resulted in hundreds of deaths every year. Now those same Zenthari were crying and begging her to stay. Yoon looked out the window at the massive excavation sites where giant machines were digging deep into the planet's crust. Those machines had been designed by humans, built by humans, and operated by humans. The Zenthari had contributed nothing except complaints about human methods. More messages kept coming in from mining supervisors across the galaxy. The asteroid mining operations in the belt system were shutting down because the human crews were packing up and leaving. The deep core extractors on Titan Prime were being abandoned because the Vorthek overseers had no idea how to operate them. Without human mining expertise, dozens of worlds would face shortages of essential materials within months. Diyun began the shutdown procedures for the mining facility. Her team moved efficiently, packing up the specialized equipment and preparing to evacuate. The Xanthari workers watched in horror as the humans dismantled the systems that had made their world prosperous. Many of them had families to feed and no other source of income. The irony was not lost on Yoon. The same aliens who had restricted human expansion were now realizing that their own prosperity depended on human labor. The Xanthari had voted in favor of every resolution that limited human rights. They had supported the measures that treated humans as second-class citizens. Now, they were discovering what life looked like without human contributions. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Ambassador Subin was having similar conversations with desperate alien officials. Her office on Proxima Station had become a meeting place for frantic diplomats who were just beginning to understand the scale of the disaster they had created. The Aquatic Collective representative had arrived first. His water-filled environmental suit was fogging up from his rapid breathing. He explained that his homeworld was facing another outbreak of the crimson algae that had nearly destroyed their oceans 5 years ago. Only human biotechnology had saved them before. And now all the human research stations were being evacuated. Subin remembered the Aquatic Collective's attitude during the council sessions. They had consistently voted to limit human research, claiming that human scientists were too reckless and needed alien oversight. They had demanded that all human biological research be approved by alien committees who often rejected projects for political reasons rather than scientific ones. The Hive Queen representative arrived next. Her clicking sounds were so frantic that the translation system kept producing error messages. She was trying to explain that the food production systems on her colonies were failing. The complex agricultural techniques that humans had developed were the only thing keeping billions of insect-like beings from starving. Without human agricultural specialists, the hive worlds would face famine within months. Subin listened to each desperate plea with growing satisfaction. These same aliens had spent decades treating humans like useful pets who should be grateful for any scraps of respect thrown their way. They had voted for every resolution that restricted human freedom while taking advantage of human expertise whenever it benefited. The communication systems were overloaded with messages from across the galaxy. Trade routes that had been established and maintained by human logistics experts were already beginning to fail. The complex supply chains that fed raw materials to manufacturing worlds and finished goods to consumer markets were collapsing without human coordination. Dr. Wu Jin received the most desperate messages of all. His research facility on Europa had been the center of galactic medical research for 20 years. The breakthrough treatments for dozens of alien diseases had been developed in his laboratories. The vaccine for the void plague that had saved billions of lives had been created by his team of human scientists. Now, those same aliens who had benefited from human medical research were facing new outbreaks of diseases they could not cure. The Luminari were flickering weakly as an energy virus spread through their population. The Vorthak were dying from a genetic disorder that only human gene therapy could treat. The crystal beings of the Shard Collective were cracking and breaking apart from a mineral deficiency that human supplements had been preventing. Each species had voted to restrict human medical research, claiming it was too dangerous or too experimental. Now, they were discovering that their own medical knowledge was centuries behind human capabilities. Their doctors and scientists had become dependent on human expertise without ever admitting it. The withdrawal was proceeding exactly as planned. Human facilities across the galaxy were being evacuated. Human personnel were returning to Earth, and the colony's human technology was being packed up and shipped away. The aliens were finally getting what they had always claimed. They wanted a galaxy without human interference. But as the hours passed and the reports kept coming in, it became clear that the aliens had made a terrible mistake. They had never realized how much their civilization depended on human contributions. They had taken human expertise for granted while publicly dismissing it as primitive and dangerous. The galaxy was about to learn a harsh lesson about the difference between want and need. The aliens had wanted to control and limit humanity, but they needed human knowledge, and Skills to survive the withdrawal was not just a political statement, it was a demonstration of human importance that could not be ignored or Yun watched the last transport ship leave Kepler 442b, carrying the final group of human engineers. The mining facility stood silent and empty for the first time in 20 years. The Xanthari workers gathered around the abandoned equipment. They could not operate staring at the machines that had made their world prosperous. The age of human servitude was over. The age of human independence had begun, and the aliens were about to discover what they had lost. Commander Taeyong stood on the bridge of the UES Incheon, watching the long-range sensors display flashing red warnings across multiple star systems. 3 months had passed since humanity's withdrawal from the Galaxy Council, and the galaxy was tearing itself apart. The ancient conflicts that human diplomats had spent decades managing were erupting into full-scale wars. The Christek Empire and the nomadic swarms had resumed their blood feud within weeks of the human withdrawal. These two species had been enemies for thousands of years, fighting over territory and resources across the spiral arm. Human mediators had managed to maintain an uneasy peace between them for the past 50 years, through careful diplomacy and strategic interventions. Now, without human peacekeepers to enforce ceasefires and negotiate truces, the war was spreading like wildfire across dozens of star systems. The Christek were using their planet-killer weapons to destroy entire worlds, while the swarms were releasing bioweapons that mutated and spread beyond their control. Refugee ships were fleeing in all directions, carrying millions of displaced by. Taeyong received reports from human observation posts throughout the region. The casualties were already in the billions and growing every day. Entire civilizations were being wiped out in the crossfire. Neutral worlds that had nothing to do with the original conflict were being invaded by desperate refugees or destroyed by stray weapons. The worst part was that both sides kept sending messages to Earth begging for human intervention. The Christek Empire offered to give humans exclusive mining rights to their crystal forests. The nomadic swarms promised to share their advanced biotechnology. But President Kyung-soo's response was always the same: humanity would not get involved in conflicts between species who had treated them as inferiors. On the other side of the galaxy, former administrator Ji-hoon watched the collapse of Vega Station. From his observation deck, the massive trade hub had been the center of galactic commerce for over a century. Thousands of ships arrived and departed every day, carrying goods between hundreds of worlds. The complex logistics network that kept everything running smoothly had been designed and maintained by human engineers. Without human oversight, the station's systems were failing. One by one, cargo ships were arriving at the wrong docking bays. Medicine shipments meant for plague-stricken worlds were being sent to luxury resorts. Food supplies were rotting in warehouses, while other worlds faced starvation. The automated systems that had seemed so efficient were actually dependent on constant human adjustments and repairs. Ji-hoon had tried to warn the alien administrators about this problem for years. He had explained that the logistics algorithms were not truly automatic. They required human intuition and problem-solving skills to handle unexpected situations the aliens had dismissed his concerns, saying that their artificial intelligence systems were superior to human intelligence. Now those same AI systems were producing nothing but error messages and failed deliveries. The alien administrators were running around in panic, trying to manually fix problems they did not understand. Entire trade routes were backing up as ships waited days or weeks for loading and unloading operations that used to take hours. The economic impact was spreading throughout the galaxy. Worlds that depended on imported food were facing famine. Planets that exported raw materials were seeing their goods pile up in warehouses with no way to ship them. Manufacturing centers were shutting down because they could not get the components they needed. Captain Minho intercepted distress signals from his position near the outer rim. His ship Soul's Pride was one of many human vessels that had been ordered to observe but not interfere in alien affairs. The messages coming through his communication system painted a picture of complete civilizational collapse. The Void Plague had returned with a vengeance. The deadly disease that had killed billions of beings across the galaxy was spreading faster than ever before. Without human research teams, To study and contain it, the infection was jumping between species and mutating in ways that made it even more dangerous, the same alien governments that had restricted human medical research were now helpless against the plague. The Luminari were dying as the disease corrupted their energy matrices. The aquatic collective was watching their population dissolve as the plague turned their water-based biology against them. The hive queens were losing entire colonies as the plague spread through their interconnected nervous systems. Minho listened to the desperate pleas for help with a mixture of sadness and anger. He remembered how these same species had voted to limit human medical research. They had claimed that human treatments were too experimental and dangerous. They had demanded that all human medical facilities be supervised by alien committees, who often shut down promising research projects now. They were discovering that their own medical knowledge was primitive compared to human capabilities. Their doctors had no idea how to treat diseases that human physicians had been curing for decades. Their research facilities were centuries behind human laboratories in terms of equipment and techniques. The irony was bitter. The aliens had been so afraid of human medical experiments that they had crippled their own ability to survive. The restrictions they had placed on human research were now costing them billions of lives, but the medical crisis was just one part of a larger pattern of failure. The same species that had dismissed human engineering as crude and inefficient were watching their infrastructure collapse without human maintenance. The aliens who had called human agricultural techniques primitive were facing widespread famine as their food production systems failed. Deep in space, the ancient watchers were stirring. These mysterious beings had remained neutral in galactic politics for millions of years, observing and recording but never interfering. They had watched the rise and fall of countless civilizations, always maintaining their policy of non-intervention, but even the watchers were concerned by the scale of the chaos engulfing the galaxy. Their long-range sensors detected massive fleet movements as old enemies prepared for war. Entire sectors were being evacuated as conflicts that had been dormant for centuries suddenly erupted into violence. The delicate balance of power that had maintained galactic stability for thousands of years was completely shattered. The complex web of alliances and treaties that had prevented major wars was falling apart. Without human diplomats to maintain and repair its species that had coexisted peacefully for generations were suddenly at each other's throats. Resource conflicts that had been resolved through negotiation were now being settled through violence. Trade disputes that had been handled by arbitration were escalating into economic warfare. The Watchers' ancient archives contained records of similar collapses throughout galactic history, but never before had they seen a civilization fall apart so quickly or so completely. The removal of a single species from the galactic community had triggered a cascade of failures that threatened to destroy everything. For the first time in their long history, the Watchers began to consider breaking their policy of non-intervention. The galaxy was sliding toward a dark age that could last for millennia unless something changed. Soon, the greatest civilization in galactic history would collapse into barbarism, and Koostayung received new orders from Earth Command. Human ships were to continue observing and recording, but under no circumstances were they to provide aid or assistance to alien populations. The withdrawal was complete and irreversible. The aliens would have to solve their own problems or face the consequences. As he watched another star system fall into chaos, Taeyang wondered if the aliens would learn from their mistakes. The galaxy was paying a terrible price for their arrogance and prejudice, but perhaps the price was necessary to teach them the value of respect and cooperation. The age of human subservience was over. The age of consequences had begun. The Galaxy Council's emergency session was unlike anything in the institution's 1,000-year history. Chancellor Zethvar stood at the center of the crystalline chamber, but his usual commanding presence was gone. His blue skin had turned a sickly purple color, and his hands shook as he tried to maintain order. The stress of the galactic crisis was literally eating him alive. Around the chamber, the other alien representatives were in similar states of distress. The hive queens were clicking so frantically that their sounds had become a constant buzz of panic. The Luminari were flickering between colors so rapidly that several of them had begun to fade entirely. The aquatic collective members were thrashing in their water tanks, making desperate bubbling sounds. General Haiwan monitored the pathetic scene from her command center on Luna Base. The aliens' communications were no longer encrypted. They were too desperate to care about security. The messages flooding human space were a mixture of formal apologies, desperate pleas, and increasingly generous bribes. The Vorthok were offering exclusive access to their rare earth deposits that they had jealously guarded for centuries. The Christek Empire was promising to share their advanced crystal-growing technology. The nomadic swarms were even offering to give humans their bioweapons research in exchange for medical assistance. But the most humiliating messages came from the species that had been most arrogant in their treatment of humans. The Luminari, who had always claimed to be the most advanced beings in the galaxy, were now suggesting that humanity might be considered junior partners instead of probationary members. This from the species that had spent decades treating humans like clever Pechi One. Read each message with cold satisfaction before filing it away with the thousands of others. Earth's policy was clear: no negotiations until the aliens demonstrated genuine change in their attitudes. The bribes and promises meant nothing if they came from the same prejudiced mindset that had created the crisis in the first place. Dr. Sang-min was receiving the most desperate communications of all. His former research facility on Europa had become the focal point of alien hopes as the medical crisis deepened. The void plague was mutating faster than ever before creating new strains that were immune to the old treatments. The hive queens were losing entire colonies as the plague spread through their interconnected nervous systems. Their request for help was particularly pathetic because they had been the ones who had voted to shut down human plague research 5 years ago. They had claimed that human methods were too dangerous and that their own medical knowledge was superior. Now they were discovering that their medical technology was useless against the mutated plague. Their doctors had no idea how to treat a disease that attacked neural networks. Their research facilities lacked the basic equipment needed to study viral mutations. The aquatic collective was facing an even worse crisis. The crimson algae that had nearly destroyed their oceans was back and spreading faster than ever before. Their water-based biology made them particularly vulnerable to the toxins produced by the algae. Without human biotechnology to neutralize the threat, their entire species faced extinction within months. Sang-min remembered the aquatic collective's attitude during the council sessions. They had consistently voted against human research projects, claiming that human scientists were too reckless and needed constant alien supervision. They had demanded that all human biological experiments be approved by committees of alien experts, who often rejected projects for political rather than scientific reasons. The irony was that those same alien experts were now helpless against threats that human scientists had been successfully treating for decades. The restrictions they had placed on human research had left them dependent on human expertise, while publicly denying that dependence on the war-torn frontier. Admiral Dong-Wu watched the conflict between the Christek Empire and the nomadic swarms escalate beyond anyone's control. The casualty reports were staggering, with entire star systems being depopulated by the fighting. Both sides were using weapons of mass destruction with no regard for civilian casualties. The Christek had deployed their planet-killer crystals that could crack worlds apart from the inside. The nomadic swarms had released self-replicating bioweapons that consumed all organic matter in their path. Neutral worlds were being evacuated as the conflict spread, but there was nowhere safe to run. Both sides kept sending desperate messages to Earth begging for human intervention. The Christek offered to make humans equal partners in their empire. The swarms promised to share their advanced biotechnology and even offered to serve as human allies in future conflicts, but President Kyung-soo's response was always the same. Humanity would not intervene in conflicts between species who had spent decades treating them as inferiors. The aliens needed to learn that actions had consequences, and that respect could not be demanded, only earned. The economic collapse was equally severe. The Kepler mining consortium had lost over 80% of its productivity. Without human engineers to operate the complex extraction equipment, the spiral trade routes were completely blocked by delayed shipments and system failures. The galactic economy was in free fall. Chief economist Youngmin's reports painted a picture of complete systemic failure. The sophisticated supply chains that had fed Billions of beings across thousands of worlds were collapsing without human coordination. The artificial intelligence systems that had seemed so advanced were proving to be dependent on constant human oversight and adjustment. The alien governments were discovering that their prosperity had been built on a foundation of human expertise that they had taken for granted. The same species that had called human methods primitive and inefficient were now helpless without human technical support. But perhaps the most telling sign of alien desperation was the secret delegation that arrived at Earth's orbital defense platform. The group included high-ranking officials from every major species in the galaxy, including some who had been humanity's harshest critics. Ambassador Jin Ho, now serving as Earth's Secretary of Non-Alien Affairs, met with the delegation in a sterile conference room aboard the defense station. The aliens looked broken and defeated, their usual arrogance replaced by desperate humility. The delegation's leader was Chancellor Zethvar himself. The proud Altarian who had once dismissed human concerns with a wave of his hand was now begging for mercy. His purple skin was covered in stress marks and his voice shook as he spoke. The aliens offered complete restructuring of the galactic government around human preferences. They promised voting rights proportional to contribution rather than population. They suggested that the Galaxy Council's capital should be moved to human space. They even offered to accept human authority over all major galactic decisions. But the most shocking offer came from the Luminari. Representative, the energy being who had once called humans primitive meat creatures, was now suggesting that humanity should be recognized as the galaxy's senior species with all other races. Serving as junior partners, Jin Ho listened to each offer with careful attention, but his response was measured and firm. These were the same beings who had spent decades treating humans as second-class citizens, the same species who had voted for every restriction on human freedom while benefiting from human expertise. The aliens would have to prove that their attitudes had genuinely changed before any negotiations could begin. Words were cheap, but actions had consequences. The galaxy was paying the price for their arrogance, and they would continue to pay until they learned the value of respect. As the delegation prepared to leave, Chancellor Zethvar made one final desperate plea. He spoke about the billions of beings who were dying because of the crisis. He begged Jin Ho to consider the innocent civilians who had never voted for anti-human policies. Jin Ho's response was cold but fair. The innocent civilians had benefited from human expertise while their governments oppressed humans. If they wanted human help, they needed to demand better leadership from their own species. The responsibility for change lay with the aliens, not with humanity. The delegation, left empty-handed but with a clear message, change would have to come from within alien society before humanity would consider returning to galactic affairs. The age of human subservience was over permanently. 1 year after the Great Withdrawal, Director Sujin sat in her office at the Human Intelligence Coordination Center reviewing the latest reports from across the galaxy. The numbers were staggering and getting worse every day. The death toll from various conflicts had exceeded 50 billion beings. Entire species were facing extinction, not from human action but from their own inability to work together without human guidance. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. The same aliens who had called humans warlike and primitive were now engaged in the most destructive conflicts the galaxy had ever seen. The species that had lectured humans about emotional control and rational decision-making were tearing each other apart in fits of rage and pride. The Christek Empire and nomadic swarms war had spread to over 200 star systems. The bioweapons released by the swarms had mutated beyond their control, consuming entire planets before burning themselves out. The Christek planet-killer crystals had cracked the cores of dozens of worlds, turning them into expanding debris fields that threatened shipping lanes. But the war between the two major powers was just the beginning. Old grudges that had been buried for centuries were surfacing everywhere. The Hive Queens were fighting among themselves as different colonies competed for dwindling resources. The Aquatic Collective had split into warring factions that were poisoning each other's water supplies. Chief Economist Young Min's latest projections were even more devastating. The galactic economy had contracted by 70% in just 12 months. The complex trade networks that had connected thousands of worlds were in complete ruin. Supply chains that had taken centuries to develop had collapsed in a matter of weeks. The Zenthari homeworld was facing complete social breakdown. Their technology-dependent civilization was crumbling without human technical support. The power grids were failing, the transportation systems were shutting down, and the communication networks were going dark one by one. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. The Vorthek mining worlds had become ghost towns as the extraction equipment broke down without human maintenance. The Luminari research stations were going dark as their energy systems failed. The crystal cities of the Shard Collective were cracking and collapsing as their structural integrity systems failed. But perhaps the most heartbreaking reports came from the medical facilities across the galaxy. The Void Plague had evolved into dozens of new strains, each more deadly than the last, without human research to develop new treatments. The alien medical systems were completely overwhelmed. Dr. Wu Jin read the casualty reports with a mixture of sadness and frustration. The same species that had restricted his research were now dying from diseases he could have cured. The breakthrough treatments that his team had been developing were locked away in Earth's research facilities while billions of beings suffered. The aquatic collective was facing complete extinction as the crimson algae consumed their oceans. The toxins were spreading through their water-based biology faster than their medical teams could treat them. Their desperate pleas for help arrived daily, but Earth's policy remained unchanged. The Hive Queens were losing entire colonies as the plague spread through their neural networks. Their interconnected consciousness that had once been their greatest strength was now their greatest weakness as the disease jumped from mind to mind with devastating speed. Even the proud Luminari were flickering out one by one as an energy virus corrupted their matrices. Their advanced technology was useless against a threat that attacked the very essence of their being. The same beings who had once claimed to be the most evolved species in the galaxy were now helpless against a simple viral infection. The secret delegation that had visited Earth 6 months ago was back, but this time they were not offering bribes or promises. They were offering complete surrender. The aliens were ready to accept human authority over all galactic affairs. They promised to restructure their entire civilization around human preferences. Ambassador Jinho met with the delegation in the same sterile conference room, but the atmosphere was completely different. The aliens looked broken and defeated. Their usual arrogance had been replaced by desperate humility. Chancellor Zethvar could barely speak above a whisper as he outlined their surrender terms. The aliens were offering to dissolve the Galaxy Council and replace it with a human-led government they promised to accept. Human governors on all major worlds. They even suggested that alien children should be educated in human schools to learn proper values and attitudes. But the most shocking offer came from the Luminari representative. The energy being who had once considered humans to be inferior animals was now suggesting that his species should serve as human servants for the next 1,000 years. This from a species that had spent millennia believing themselves to be the most advanced beings in the universe. Jinho listened to the desperate offers with growing amazement. These were the same beings who had treated humans like useful pets for decades. The same species who had voted for every restriction on human freedom while taking advantage of human expertise whenever it suited them. The transformation was complete, but it had come at a terrible cost. The galaxy was burning and billions of beings were dying because of alien pride and prejudice. The same species that had been too arrogant to accept humans as equals were now begging to become human subjects. President Kyung-Soo's response to the surrender offers was firm but measured. Humanity would consider their proposals, but only after the aliens demonstrated genuine change in their attitudes. The galaxy needed to prove that it had learned from its mistakes before any new arrangements could be made. The aliens needed to show that they understood the value of cooperation and respect. They needed to demonstrate that they could work together without human oversight. They needed to prove that their desperation was leading to genuine wisdom rather than just temporary humility. But the most important requirement was that the aliens needed to take responsibility for their own actions. The crisis was not humanity's fault. It was the direct result of alien arrogance and prejudice. The beings who had created the problem needed to acknowledge their role in the disaster. As the delegation prepared to leave, Jinho delivered a final message. The age of human servitude was over forever, If the aliens wanted human partnership, they would have to earn it through their actions, not their words. The galaxy would have to prove that it deserved human involvement, the reports from across the galaxy continued to pour in, each one worse than the last. The death toll was climbing toward 100 billion beings. The economic collapse was accelerating. The conflicts were spreading to previously peaceful regions, but perhaps most importantly, the aliens were finally beginning to understand what they had lost. The same species that had taken human contributions for granted were now desperately trying to replicate human achievements their failures were teaching them. Lessons that decades of human patience had never managed to convey. The price of pride was higher than anyone had imagined. But perhaps that price was necessary to create a better future. The galaxy was learning that respect could not be demanded or legislated. It had to be earned through mutual cooperation and genuine equality. The age of consequences was reaching its peak, but the age of redemption might be about to begin. 2 years after the Great Withdrawal, Ambassador Jinho stood once again in a galaxy council chamber, but everything had changed. The crystalline structure had been completely rebuilt in orbit around Earth, with human architects designing every detail. The seating arrangement reflected the new reality of galactic politics. Humans occupied the central dais where the most important decisions were made. The other species sat in concentric circles around them, with their seating positions determined by their contributions to galactic stability and cooperation. The old system based on population and historical claims was gone forever. Chancellor Zethvar stood at Jinho's right side, but his role had changed dramatically. The once proud Altarian now served as humanity's deputy administrator, his blue skin bearing permanent stress marks from the crisis that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization. His voice was humble as he called the session to order. The negotiations had taken 8 months of careful diplomacy, but the final agreement was revolutionary. The Terran Accords established humanity as the galaxy's senior partner with veto power over all major decisions. Human technology would be shared freely, but only with species that proved their commitment to peaceful cooperation. The old system of treating humans as junior members was not just dead, it was forgotten. The new galactic government was a meritocracy where influence was based on contribution rather than size or age. Species that helped maintain peace and stability were rewarded with greater autonomy and resources. Dr. Wujin's medical teams were already returning to plague-stricken worlds, but under strict human oversight. The void plague was being contained once again through the application of human medical knowledge that had been developed over decades of research. The alien populations were grateful for the help, but they understood that it came with conditions. The Aquatic Collective had been the first to accept the new arrangement. Their homeworld was dying, and they needed human biotechnology to survive. Within weeks of signing the cooperation agreement, human scientists were working to neutralize the crimson algae that threatened their oceans, but the aliens had to prove their commitment to change. The Aquatic Collective restructured their entire government to eliminate the committees that had restricted human research. They established human-led research facilities on their worlds and gave human scientists complete freedom to pursue their work. The Hive Queens took longer to accept the new reality, but eventually desperation overcame pride. Their interconnected colonies were collapsing as the plague spread through their neural networks. Human medical intervention was the only thing that could save them. The transformation of hive society was dramatic. They abandoned their traditional hierarchy based on genetic castes and adopted a merit-based system, similar to human organizations. Human advisors were placed in key positions throughout their government to ensure that old prejudices did not resurface. Even the proud Luminari eventually accepted human authority. Their energy-based civilization was failing as the virus corrupted their matrices. Human scientists developed a treatment that could restore their energy patterns, but the price was complete acceptance of human leadership. The Christek Empire and nomadic swarms required more direct intervention. Their war had spread to over 300 star systems and threatened to destroy entire sectors of the galaxy. Human peacekeepers were deployed to enforce ceasefires and establish buffer zones between the warring factions, but the humans did not just separate the combatants. They restructured both civilizations from the ground up. The Christek Empire's authoritarian system was replaced with a democratic government that included human advisors at every level. The nomadic swarms were organized into stable communities, with human administrators ensuring that their aggressive tendencies were channeled into productive activities. The economic recovery was equally dramatic. Human logistics experts rebuilt the galactic trade networks with new safeguards and redundancies. The complex supply chains that had collapsed during the crisis were redesigned to be more resilient and efficient. The Xanthari homeworld became a showcase for human-led reconstruction. Human engineers rebuilt their power grids with advanced fusion technology. Human architects designed new cities that were both beautiful and functional. Human educators established schools that taught alien children about cooperation and respect, but perhaps the most important change was cultural. The aliens were learning to see humans not as servants or junior partners, but as leaders who had earned their position through competence and wisdom. The old prejudices were fading as younger generations grew up in a galaxy where human authority was accepted as natural and beneficial. Captain Hyjin toured the rebuilt worlds with a sense of pride and accomplishment. The same planets that had been collapsing into chaos 2 years ago were now thriving under human guidance. The beings who had once sneered at human capabilities were now eager to learn from human examples. The transformation was not without challenges. Some alien groups resented human authority, and there were occasional rebellions and protests, but these were quickly suppressed by other aliens who understood that human leadership was the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. President Kyung-soo's final address to the reconvened Galaxy Council was brief but powerful. He spoke about the lessons that had been learned during the crisis and the importance of mutual respect in building a stable civilization. He emphasized that humanity's leadership was not based on conquest or force, but on proven ability to solve problems and maintain peace. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained. The aliens understood that they were witnessing the birth of a new era in galactic history, an era where competence and wisdom would determine leadership rather than arrogance and tradition. The irony was not lost on anyone. In the chamber, the species that had once dismissed humanity as too emotional and too aggressive had proven themselves incapable of rational cooperation without human guidance. The beings who had lectured humans about primitive behavior had descended into barbarism within months of losing human support, but Jinho felt no desire for revenge or gloating. The crisis had been terrible, and the cost in lives and suffering was something that would never be forgotten. The goal was not to punish the aliens, but to build a better future where such disasters could never happen again. The new galactic order was built on principles that humans had always believed in: merit-based leadership, cooperation instead of competition, respect for all intelligent beings regardless of their origins. The difference was that now these principles were enforced by beings who had the wisdom and strength to make them work. As the session ended, Captain Hyjin looked out at the stars visible through the chamber's transparent walls. The galaxy looked peaceful from this distance, but she knew that human peacekeepers were working around the clock to maintain that peace. Human scientists were developing new technologies to solve old problems. Human diplomats were building bridges between former enemies. The lesson had been learned the hard way, but it had been learned completely. Respect was not something that could be demanded or legislated. It had to be earned through strength, competence, and the courage to walk away when that respect was denied. The galaxy would never again mistake human patience for weakness. Human contributions would never again be taken for granted. The age of human servitude was over forever, replaced by an age of human leadership that would bring peace and prosperity to all intelligent beings. Jinho smiled as he watched the alien representatives filing out of the chamber. Many of them stopped to bow respectfully as they passed the human delegation. These were the same beings who had once treated humans like useful pets. Now they understood that humanity was not just another species, but the foundation upon which galactic civilization rested. The withdrawal had been painful but necessary. It had shown the galaxy what life looked like without human guidance. The chaos and destruction that followed had taught lessons that decades of patient diplomacy had failed to convey. Now the real work could begin: building a civilization based on mutual respect and cooperation, creating institutions that served all beings rather than privileging a few, developing technologies that would benefit everyone rather than just the Powerful, the humans had retreated from diplomacy and thrown the galaxy into chaos, but from that chaos had emerged something better, a new order where wisdom guided power and where all beings could thrive together, the age of human leadership had begun, and the galaxy would be better for it. Hash parts 1 to 6. Humans retreat from diplomacy.